streaming.
Senator, I believe you're live.
Perfect, and thank you. Good evening to our live audience, to all of our senators. I'm Corey McCray, the 45th Legislative District and Chairman for the Baltimore City Senate delegation. I'm just thankful that you all are able to join us here for tonight's delegation's weekly virtual grassroots brief. I just want to take the time out to acknowledge our senators that are currently with us at this moment. We are joined by Senator Antonio Hayes momentarily. Senator Jill Carter will be joining us momentarily, but we do have right here in front of me the Senate President, who likes to be called the Senator from the 46th Legislative District, Senator Bill Ferguson. We're also joined by Senator Mary Washington. And tonight's briefing, and we will be joined momentarily by Senator Charles Sidnall also. Tonight's briefing will be on public safety. It's no secret that crime and violence has been an issue plaguing our city for the last several years, significantly impacting our people in our neighborhoods. We are grateful for the opportunity to hear from some of our public safety professionals on what is taking place to reduce crime and prevent violence. We have two panels, one comprised of state officials with the other comprised of city officials. We will hear from each panelist on what is taking place to increase public safety at his or her agency. We will hear from panelists on panel one. I'm going to introduce the first person, the Honorable John Anderson, Sheriff of Baltimore City, joins us. Sheriff Anderson started his career with
He's on mute.
50 years ago as Deputy Sheriff. He became Sheriff in 1989, and he has served the citizens of Baltimore faithfully in that role ever since. Sheriff Anderson, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Senator. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to sit on this esteemed panel. Also, I'd like to say good afternoon to all the panel members and also everyone else is sitting in and listening in. The Sheriff's Office here in Baltimore City is a state constitutional office. And basically a lot of our duties is mandated in the state code. And basically we are executionary for the Circuit Court of Baltimore City. Some of the duties that we perform is courthouse security, service of civil and criminal process, prisoner transport, warrant services, domestic violence, and child support enforcement. And what we look at is that everything we do has a story behind it. A lot of times when folks run into problems, especially in their personal life, they reach out to the court system. A lot of times in order to remedy a lot of problems that folks have, the courts intervene, and if it comes to a situation where a hearing is set up in the courts, then that's when a summons is sent over to our office to serve on all parties concerned to get them into the courts. So a lot of these problems, a lot of social problems can be addressed, especially this day and time when the virus hit. A lot of folks were shutting indoors with each other. And a lot of times what had happened is a lot of conflict came about. And basically what a lot of folks did was reach out to the courts. And basically when they reached out to the courts, our domestic violence unit got involved. And on a number of occasions, our folks had to go out, serve summonses on folks to get them into court to get their problems resolved. And even in a number of these cases, when orders have been issued to the sheriff to go out and serve these processes, sometimes it's mentioned in the order that we seize weapons. And if it's mentioned that we seize weapons, then we seize weapons. And at that point, we secure them at the Baltimore City Police Department property room. So there are a lot of activities that we do court-related, but they have an effect on people's lives here in Baltimore City. Also, what we look at is a lot of wants we have for a lot of violent people. And what we try to do is we try to get out and execute these wants as quick and as efficient as we can. And basically what we have involved ourselves in through the years is different task forces to address our want operations here in Baltimore City. We have task forces with the Marshal Service, Maryland State Police. We also worked on initiatives with the Baltimore City Police Department to work on getting a lot of violent people off the street. So at this time, I guess for time's sake, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sheriff Anderson. We're going to wait to hear from Colonel Jones and Executive Director Houston, and then we're going to take questions as a whole. I'm going to move on to our Superintendent Woodrow Jerry Jones of the Maryland State Police. Prior to becoming a state police superintendent, Mr. Jones served 5 years as chief of MTA Police. He started his career as a Maryland State Police cadet, retiring at the rank of Chief of Field Operations Bureau before returning back to the MSP as our superintendent. Colonel Jones.
Thank you, Senator McCray. Good evening, everyone. To my panelists, certainly to the Baltimore City Senate delegation, I appreciate the opportunity to participate this evening. As we navigate into 2021, we certainly, as the Maryland State Police, continue to coordinate our state law enforcement assets to support Commissioner Harrison with his team's crime prevention and crime fighting strategies. As a team, we continue with I believe is a very highly successful operations, the Baltimore Enhanced Visibility Patrol. That's certainly been in place since December of 2017. And when you look at the outcomes, we're just short of 900,000 premise checks conducted by that team since 2017, 203 guns recovered, and almost 4,700 warrants served. So there's been a lot of force multiplier, I think you could argue, for the Baltimore City Police Department. We continue that role as we speak today. Our role in the Baltimore City Crime Prevention Initiative, we have our Strike Force 7. We work with the local, state, and federal partners as part of Baltimore's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. They address violent crime organizations operating in the city and around the state. In addition to that, we have our resources that were originally scheduled to go to the BRIC, the Baltimore Regional Intelligence Center. Those resources have been shifted to the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center. So we still have a number of criminal analysts that have been hired to focus on Baltimore-centric investigations and certainly providing support to their crime prevention efforts and investigations and whatever resource they may need to further what they're trying to do. We're working with Baltimore Police Department on various initiatives for 2021 during the planning phases as we speak. And once again, as always, our main focus from state law enforcement is to support and be a force multiplier for Baltimore PD's priorities. Certainly there's offenders out there that we want to work collaboratively with to make the most impact on the violent crime in the city. As you all well know, we have Senate Bill 907 and 929. They were the vetoes were overturned by the House and the Senate recently. I've had initial meetings on Senate Bill 907 to get that process underway, being an emergency bill. We're working on what that logistically looks like as we have a law enforcement coordinating council, as well as setting up regional law enforcement councils to make sure that we have a prevention intel type thing, make sure we're communicating and sharing resources to get those crime initiatives well taken care of. As we move into 929, Commissioner Harrison and I, we've already had a conversation. We know we need to get together and talk about some memorandums of understanding as we look at jurisdictional related issues, concurrent and sharing some of that jurisdiction with state law enforcement and providing assistance where we can make the most impact and give it. And he'll be able to leverage some resources to help his crime fight internally. As I've said a couple times throughout this whole process, rarely a week goes by that the commissioner and I aren't talking. So we have good communications since my time as superintendent, being here for a little over a year now. We've shared a lot of company on different issues in Baltimore City, and that is a strong relationship, and we continue to build on that as we move forward. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Colonel Jones. And last, we'll move on to Director Fuston. Glenn Fuston, Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. Mr. Fuston had a successful career with the Washington/Baltimore high-intensity drug trafficking area prior to joining the governor's office. His office works to improve public safety and the administration of justice while working to reduce crime, violence, delinquency, and substance abuse. At this moment, I would like to bring in Director Fuston.
Great. Thank you very much, Senator. And thank you to all the senators that invited us to speak today, and obviously my panel partners as well. It's a great collaboration that we have working together to serve the citizens of Baltimore. And I wanted to thank the citizens of Baltimore for all your support as well as we continue to move forward. Figured I'd give you a quick update on what our office is doing. As you know, our office is not an enforcement office directly. We are a policy agency with the governor's office. A lot of people are aware of our grant making capabilities within the office. Since the inception of the governor's administration, we've provided 700 grants, totaling nearly $200 million to Baltimore City directly, just out of our office. Our office, though, is also responsible for the policy component. So although we are making grants and making sub-awards to nonprofits, governmental agencies, and local agencies within Baltimore City, we're also focused on the policy side. And we do that through a multidisciplinary approach, working with law enforcement agencies, victim service agencies, as well as children and youth serving agencies. On the law enforcement front, we're obviously partners with the Sheriff's Office, the Baltimore Police Department, and with the Maryland State Police, as well as our federal partners that we have working in the city. We also have the Governor's Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network, which we participate with those same agencies that work to share information to identify violent criminal offenders across the city and across the state, matter of fact, to make sure that they can cease their violent operations. Thus far, that project just in Baltimore City has identified 18 criminal organizations, arrested 500 individuals, and removed 122 guns from the street. It's important to note that we have other projects that are going down the same types of lines. So we have the Gun Violence Reduction Grant, which we work with Baltimore Police Department on, which has seized over 3,500 guns from the street. In addition to our traditional law enforcement support, though, we are also providing programs through our justice reinvestment initiatives, programs that are law enforcement assisted diversion, for example, or our heroin coordinating program. With the law enforcement assisted diversion program, we've been able to refer over 370 individuals away from arrest and into mental health services since 2017. In our heroin coordinator program, we've actually made 500 drug referrals. So this is the change that we were looking for with the Justice Reinvestment program, and we're able to shift those individuals that are nonviolent into other programs. As I mentioned, we're also working with the children and the youth component. So children and youth are the core to what we do. We moved the Governor's Office for Children under our office just recently so that we could have this more robust look at the criminal justice system as a whole. And beyond just the criminal justice system, what we're working with our children is we're working on their general well-being. So we're working with partner agencies across the state, like the Child Abuse Center. We have programs with the Family League of Baltimore. We have the program Handle with Care that refers children that have been experienced trauma to their schools after they've had experiences with law enforcement. And we're happy that we've been able to support over 200,000 children in Baltimore City through this program, which is it's been a great asset. I would also say, just in terms of funding, as we go back to that, we're proud that we were just able to announce that we released $3.5 million to the Family League of Baltimore in order to provide these types of services across the city. The final component, or the third leg to this stool, is our victim services component. And in here, we are able to help 220,000 victims of crime in Baltimore City alone. And with the victim services unit, we're providing direct services, or money to direct servicing agencies, but we're also providing funds to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, Sexual Assault Reimbursement Unit. And some examples that we've been able to come up with there, we've processed over 3,200 claims with the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board and given out about $9 million specifically to victims of crime through that program. The final component of the victims side of the house and shows the wraparound, the coordination that we have between our enforcement, our children and youth, and our victim services side is our Baltimore City Witness Protection Program, where we've allotted $2.3 million to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office to work in conjunction with other partners in the city to provide funding for victim witnesses' safety during the criminal justice process. So I hope that shows the commitment that the governor has to the criminal justice process from our office. We're great partners with our law enforcement entities while working with our child serving agencies as well as our victim serving agencies. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Director Houston. At this moment, I'm going to open it up for questions. Sheriff Anderson, Director Houston, and Colonel Jones from the Maryland State Police. I see that Senator Ferguson has his hands up. Senator Ferguson with the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is for Superintendent Jones. Appreciate you being here this evening. So I think that the level of gun crime has just been unconscionable recently. And it just, so there's sort of two related questions. One is, I know we've had these huge increase in the applications for new firearms purchases in the last 6 months of the year. So that's sort of one component. And I know there's been a lot of time spent on the processing of firearms applications. I'm curious whether, is the state police the key agency for these, for guns that are getting into the hands of individuals who may be prohibited from having them, and then traced back to the person where it originally came from? Not necessarily the straw purchaser, but the person that was the legal firearm owner that provided. Is it the state police or is it city police that are ultimately the ones in charge of the investigations of tracking back for the guns that are supplying in?
Yes, we have, the Maryland State Police has the Maryland Gun Center, which is a resource through all state, federal, and local law enforcement. So each has their individual cases that they work. However, we do provide some of those linkages to seeing what's behind the scenes, so to speak, as far as what the history of the gun may be. But oftentimes we plug in our federal partners like the ATF into that process as well. We have a good relationship with those folks locally, and I know Commissioner Harrison does as well. And we work those links the best we can to track that. If it's a legitimately purchased weapon, obviously there's other things that come into play that kind of thwart those efforts to some degree.
So we had worked to close a loophole that allowed, if somebody did not pay for it, they could get through. There was no crime for letting somebody borrow a gun. And we had closed this loophole that sort of said if it was ultimately used in a crime, you could be charged for letting somebody borrow a gun, not for cost. Have you seen an increase in prosecution, or at least charges brought for the supply of weapons that have been used in crimes?
I can't give you data exactly how many on that particular subset of the gun culture that you're describing. We do a lot of cases. We do a lot of nexus cases with Baltimore City specifically. But I can certainly get you that data that breaks down exactly kind of the loaner type thing. Somebody allows someone to have a weapon. Obviously there's a bunch of implications legally with that, whether they're, eligible to have that weapon and so on and so forth, being a felon. But to have, I don't have that data exactly of what that breakdown would be under those circumstances. It'd
be great if you could follow up, maybe, and I might also follow up too. Just trying to get a handle on. The guns are unyielding, and just it is getting to it's been unconscionable. It unfortunately feels like it's getting worse.
Yes, sir. I'll have Tom Williams reach out to you guys and just give the specifics of what you're looking for.
That'd be great. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Washington.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you all for visiting us here this evening. Sheriff Anderson, again, it's good to see you.
Good seeing you, Senator.
I wanted to ask about another area, housing, and so your role in evictions. And maybe you could talk with us, given COVID, given a number, are you seeing increases in evictions, and how is that, what's it look like from your department?
Well, at this point, we're only doing what they call tenant holding over evictions or squatter evictions. And the typical evictions for, I guess you would say, non-payment of rent is basically on hold at this point.
Right.
And basically, once the courts get up and running, then what we're looking to see is that machinery is really start to kick in. And at that point, I guess we can be on, have to put our skates on to kind of keep up.
And Sheriff, that's why I just want to raise it at this point and just alert that, of course, we're hoping that at the federal level and our level, we can address not only, staving of evictions, but that we're providing funds to landlord, once that stops, whether it's 6 months from now or a year, that at some point there'll be almost potentially a tsunami of evictions, and just the extent to which you have any, if you're looking at that if you, based on past, can you anticipate, is it going to increase 20%, 30%? And do we need to start figuring out how to support your office in being able to manage these? Again, not to evict people. We don't want to do that, but just recognizing we're going to have to figure out how to reconcile non-payment of rent and property owners' rights to get rent and to not have people, on their property that is not paying rent. So do you have you all been thinking about this? And
well, Senator, you must have a crystal ball that links right into our office, right? Because one of the things that me and my senior commanders been discussing is once these moratoriums is over with, we know that we're going to have an avalanche full of these eviction orders coming through our office. And what we are looking to do is put together a work group now to look at how we're going to handle these cases to come through. What we do hope is that at the federal level and at the state level, there'll be some funding to actually help the tenant and also give some relief to the landlord that maybe will cut down on a number of these evictions. But we know that it's coming, and what we want to do is have a plan in place to address it.
Well, Chairman, I want to say, I think that that's something that we should look at, and I'm sure we'll provide any support we can to make sure it's equitable, and because we already have very high eviction rates pre-COVID, so
absolutely.
We want to make sure that
what we could do, Senator, is
it looks like you're.
That's
Sheriff, I just wanted to jump in here really quick. I'm sorry. I just wanted to jump in really quickly and mention on each eviction, each one of these tenants is provided with resources to let them know that there is information out there, okay, on data to provide them with support. Okay, we're already providing them with that information. I just wanted to mention that really quickly.
Sure, great, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. At this time, we encourage our state partners to hang around, but we're going to start bringing in some of our city partners. And the first one will go in this order. I'm proud of Commissioner Michael Harrison of our Baltimore City Police Department, who we call our Baltimore's top cop. Commissioner Harrison came to Baltimore after a very successful career with the New Orleans Police Department, retiring at the rank of Chief of Police. He's been focused on preventing violence, increasing BPD's recruitment numbers, and implementing the consent decree between the City of Baltimore and the U.S. Department of Justice. Commissioner Harrison.
Good evening, and thank you, Senator McCray, for the invitation. Good evening to the entire delegation, and certainly to all my co-panelists that are on, fellow panelists. Look, our department continues to be laser focused on those responsible for violence in our city. In the past 2 months, we've been working hard to apprehend these violent offenders to make our city safer, including making arrests on 17 homicide cases and 23 non-fatal shooting cases, Right now, our current cumulative clearance rate is 48%, and an increase of those illegally carrying guns is up 29%. Just a little bit on where we are, property crime is down 39%, violent crime is down 21%. That the current level of violence in this city is way too high. And while we may be experiencing some reductions, you know, it's really doesn't matter to the person who just got victimized or the person who is a victim or knows someone who is a victim. This weekend alone, I was on the scene where a 10-year-old girl was shot following a beef between two different groups who began indiscriminately firing at each other. You know, I'm glad to report that the young girl is expected to make a full recovery. And we know how this type of trauma inflicted on our young people and families is way too common. But together, that's why it's so important that we address the root causes of violence and why so many of our people have this mindset that they have to carry an illegal gun and to solve conflicts with those guns. Here's the thing I say here in Baltimore, I've said it all over the country, Senator, the decision to pull the trigger is not made when a person pulls the trigger. It's actually made when a person decides to walk out of their door with that weapon. Every day, our department and our partners here on this panel and in the city are working to address the culture of violence so that we can turn it into a culture of peace. In addition to the crime fight, you know, our department makes strides in our compliance with the consent decree. Last month, we announced a major milestone in the implementation of our new stops, searches, and arrest training, work collaboratively with the Department of Justice, the consent decree monitoring team, our BPD officers, and our community to ensure that our policies on training and stops and searches and arrests embrace national best practices, constitutional requirements, and the community-oriented policing practices that reflect what our residents really want to see from our department. And we've received nothing but positive feedback from our officers on how the training has been engaging in helping build community trust. Now this, coupled with the implementation of our new use of force policy, our training on peer intervention program, which is called EPIC, or Ethical Policing is Courageous, first of its kind, and the first of its kind upcoming community policing training based on our new community policing plan. We're transforming our department into the one our community wants, needs, and most importantly, one that we deserve. We continue to focus on the importance of de-escalation techniques, reasonable and prudent uses of force, accountability, transparency, and a true community policing focused department. Now, more information is on our website and social media. We want residents to get involved in our consent decree process, and we encourage everyone to participate in our upcoming virtual workshops, provide feedback on all of our policies and training, which go out for public input, and to participate in our monthly virtual commanders meetings in each of the 9 police districts. So thank you for your time. I know we don't have much time, but thank you. And I look forward to working more with our elected leaders, communities, businesses, nonprofits, faith-based to make our community safer for everyone who lives, works, and visits Baltimore.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Next, we'll hear from Mrs. Shantae Jackson, Director of our new Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. Ms. Jackson previously worked as Executive Director of Baltimore Community Mediation Center and was the federal court-appointed Community Engagement Liaison for the BPD Consent Decree. Mrs. Jackson. Director Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senators, for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here with you. With regard to the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, we're about 6 weeks in. I think today marks about week 6.5 for me. We've gotten a lot of work done in a relatively short period of time, given the charge that the mayor has provided us with. So just to provide some information about the scope of the office and how it differs from the scope of what was formerly known as the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, I'll start there. 2 items were specifically removed from the scope of my office coming in. The first item being the specifics around the tactical and operational matters pertaining to BPD. Those things were lifted out of the scope of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, given the consent decree implementation unit, given the consent decree monitoring team, and were escalated to the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety, Sonny Schnitzer, who now holds responsibility for that work. The second item that was removed from my scope, before I talk to you all about this number that I joke about, the 57 other things that were added to the scope of my office, is specific to the data. So the data being captured around BPD's operational functions, that now lives in the mayor's office of performance and innovation with Dan Himowitz and his team. And he often reports on a biweekly basis on police stat, crime stat numbers. And so the work hasn't stopped. The scope hasn't been removed from the mayor's suite of items, but has been removed from my particular office's agency or agency's responsibilities. What's been added to my scope revolves around addressing public safety as a public health issue in its totality, making sure that we're thinking through the social determinants of health and allowing community members, empowering community members, enabling community members to be co-producers of public safety along with BPD and other city agencies, so that we're doing the work of creating safe and healthy neighborhoods together. Specifically, in the plan that I provided to the mayor, 3 pillars rise to the top. The first pillar is that public health approach to violence. Under that pillar sits gun violence prevention. And so you all have heard him talk about focused deterrence specifically. We know that we've attempted to do this twice here in Baltimore City, once under Sheila Dixon and a second time under Stephanie Rawlings Blake. And unfortunately, we've seen that fail twice. We know why it failed twice. It failed twice for a couple of reasons. Our police force wasn't afforded the training that they absolutely needed to be successful. And more importantly, our community-based organizations in our community didn't have a seat at the table with regard to providing true wraparound services in order to facilitate the success of focused deterrence. Underneath of this gun violence prevention work, not only does the GVRS strategy sit, but also Safe Streets sit and ROCA sits, and all of these other things sit in ways that marry our agency work with community-based work. Other items under the public health approach to violence include victim services. Victims of domestic violence. We've seen an uptick in the number of homicides year over year. In fact, we saw 20% of the homicide victims in Baltimore City be directly connected to domestic violence or intimate partner abuse. Our first homicide of the year proves that we're seeing an uptick there. Other victim services that we're focusing on, sexual assault. We're also focusing on victims of human trafficking. But we don't want to forget about the victims of shootings, right? And so even though many of the folks who are victims of shootings, unfortunately, are also our high-risk individuals, they are still victims. And so making sure that through this public health approach to violence, that we don't forget about those folks as victims too. Continuing under this pillar is youth justice, specifically youth diversion, pre-arrest and not just post-arrest. Community healing. You all are working actively in session right now, having conversations about making sure that the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act is something that goes statewide. And reentry, providing those returning citizens who may or may not be high-risk individuals with unique opportunities and unique empowerment and enablement abilities to see different futures for themselves. The second pillar revolves.
Director Jackson, if we can.
Past my 5 minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Understood.
You can finish your statement though, please.
So I'll just talk about the last 2 pillars and I won't go into the detail of the pillars. So the second pillar is community engagement and interagency collaboration. And the third pillar is really about evaluation and accountability. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Director. Now I'd like to move on to our Fire Chief, Niles Ford, who is focused on diversifying the fire department and engaging community in the department's work. Chief Ford.
Senator McCray, thank you for an opportunity to speak to this distinguished group. Baltimore City Fire Department is certainly a very busy organization. It's considered one of the busiest, it's considered actually the second busiest EMS organization in the country. Our members have collectively run unit-wise over 350,000 unit calls over just the past year. And from those calls, we're responding with several different apparatuses, and we've had several successes. This past year, we had the lowest fatality rate in the history of Baltimore City Fire Department, which is 7. And also, we're doing some very innovative things with EMS, alternative destinations, mobile integrated health, community paramedicine. We one of the few organizations selected to do an ET3 program, which is emergency triage, treatment, and transport. One of the big things that we've been doing historically since I've been there is trying to guide the organization to encourage more people to become from the city to become members of the fire service or be a part of public safety in some sort or some fashion. We believe that aggressively going after diversity and aggressively reaching out to people at a street level and giving them opportunities and options, we believe that in the end, that long run helps the city in many different areas. It strengthens families, gives people an opportunity to have a middle-class occupation with high school diplomas, and also gives us an opportunity to diversify the fire department and introduce people from the community into the fire service. We've done this through high school programs. We've done this through innovating recruitment, testing processes, including using citizens to actually do the interview and ultimately select who's hired by the fire department. And we think in the end that helps even with Commissioner Harrison's goals to reduce some of the crime issues that we have in the city. So we're very excited about what we've been able to do and what we're doing, and even what we're doing in the future. We've had a meeting with the City Council in Baltimore where we're going to start reporting out to them, and they're going to give us some perspectives and ideas of how we can improve some of the things we're doing. So thank you for the opportunity, sir, to speak to you all.
Thank you, Chief Ford. And next, we're going to be joined by Emergency Manager Charles Sevilla, Office of Emergency Management, who leads a successful career at the Baltimore Fire Department.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in front of the delegation. The mission of the Office of Emergency Management, the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, or OEM, is to maintain the highest level of preparedness to protect the citizens, workers, and visitors of Baltimore from the impact of natural and man-made disasters. During 2020, OEM has been very involved in real-world emergencies, a pandemic, special events, and developing training in order to keep our agencies and stakeholders prepared. Obviously, supporting our health department in the COVID-19 response has been at the forefront of our efforts. This has included managing the operations and logistics for test sites, non-congregate housing for those exposed to the virus, as well as those that have tested positive. Setting up and managing the citywide COVID equipment and supplies warehouse for city employees, and this has included the PPE as well. We've worked with the Baltimore City Fire Department to sanitize city offices and buildings where there may have been a potential outbreak due to multiple positive cases in those areas. We've worked to identify purchasing methods and vendors for our COVID supplies. And now we are assisting in supporting the needs of the health department for setup and maintaining mass vaccination sites. Outside of our COVID response, we have produced and participated in 3 exercises to test the city's capabilities in a variety of focus areas. Hurricane, we put together a hurricane preparedness tabletop, a pandemic tabletop, as well as an annual snow storm tabletop. We also arranged for fire and police to attend a virtual training session dealing with active assailant incident command for both fire and police department upper management teams. We provided community outreach at several events in the city, including a program for houses of worship, hospitals, and communities that have been impacted by weather events. We responded to several real-world emergencies and provided the support needed to the agencies involved. Examples of them were the natural gas explosions at Labyrinth Road and Lanier Avenue. We had multiple severe weather incidents, including flooding, 2 tropical storms. We also assisted with response and planning for the planned protests that occurred in the city. At the end, we also assisted the Board of Elections with voter boxes and polling locations for both primary and national elections. So as you can see by that list, we've been pretty busy the last 12 to 18 months, but we will continue to work with all agencies, and we are prepared to respond, make sure everyone's prepared to respond whatever comes along, as well as any recovery efforts needed afterwards. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to move to questions. I'm going to go to Senator Hayes and then Senator Washington.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't realize that my camera was still off. I know we have a limited amount of time. It looked like approximately 6 minutes left.
We started late, so we're going to go till about 7:10.
Oh, God bless you. You are wonderful. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
One is more of a statement. And one, we have some of the greatest institutions of academic achievement here in the city, whether it be in the high schools with like Vivian T. Thomas as it relates to the fire department, training young people on, some of the skills that's needed in the EMS community, or Coppin State University and the criminal justice community. I know oftentimes there's a lot of studies and research that need to be done. I would just encourage all of our partners in public safety to use that as an opportunity to partner with some of those institutions and create our next group of professionals. But I just have one question, and mainly directed to Director Jackson. You had mentioned the failure of 2 former mayors of the city and their programs. I wasn't sure which areas you were referring to, but I was wondering if you could help us understand what success looked like given the new portfolio that is under your office.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Senator. To be clear, I didn't mention failure of the mayors, but failure of the initiatives.
Right. Can you mention what initiatives they were?
Operation Ceasefire, TOMS 2, not to be confused with Baltimore Ceasefire 365, right? So those 2 programs were our attempt to do focused deterrence under the Dixon and the Rawlings-Blake administrations. We have seen them be successful in other places around the country. In the places where we've seen them be successful, though, is those places where we've seen community members, community-based organizations, city agencies, and their law enforcement agencies all partner together. I would say that in the call-ins that we were doing in our history with Operation Ceasefire, there was a lot of stick and no carrot, or maybe fake carrot, if you will, because there were a lot of promises about providing folks with alternatives to their high-risk activity, but we failed to deliver on those.
I'm still at a loss. So how would you define success? And I'll tell you, so in those years, I served as assistant deputy mayor for the city of Baltimore. And so I had a role in some of this stuff. I'm still trying to figure out, like, what do you define as success of those programs? Is that the partnership part, or what part of it do you define as operation for Operation Ceasefire? I'm familiar with the public health strategy around it all, but.
So ultimately, how I personally define success, and I'd love to hear the police commissioner's thoughts about this too, but how I define success is in a couple of ways. A reduction in recidivism, a reduction in retaliation associated with shootings, a reduction in shootings, whether they're fatal or non-fatal, community-based organizations having the capacity, both from a technical assistance and a funding perspective, to provide the supports that people need. A great example of that, and one that the police commissioner and I talked about fairly recently, is if you have a high-risk individual who says, yeah, I want to get out of this life and I don't need to live next door to this particular person, you need to find me somewhere to live. How do we find that person somewhere to live? It's going to involve all agencies, all hands on deck. All agencies will need to be a part of the co-production of public safety, and not just in word, but in deed. And in cases where agencies aren't able to help, for example, let's say Housing Authority of Baltimore City can't offer this particular person a voucher, what other community-based organizations that assist with housing could be brought into the conversation to make sure that we're not just telling this person that we want them to have a healthier life, that we want to increase the quality of life, reduce their recidivism likelihood, but empowering them and enabling them to actually get there and do that. PC, would you add anything to that?
I think you explained it very well with specifics. Senator, I would say focus deterrence. It's if you just think of it as a 5-pillar system: prevention, intervention, enforcement, rehabilitation, and reentry. When all 5 of those are performing and hitting on all cylinders, we're preventing young people from getting involved in a life of crime. We're intervening against those who are involved in it. We're enforcing those who are just hell-bent on being violent. We're dealing with rehabilitation for those who have a number of issues that pull or push them toward that life. And then for reentry, those coming out. And if we can help those people either not get in it or to come out of it or to intervene and provide them all the things that Director Jackson just talked about, you will see a reduction in not necessarily the overall shootings, but when it comes to group and gang violence. And where I've seen it work in New Orleans, it started with group and gang violence, and then the culture began to change. Then it was all violence. And we saw those reductions. And then those men, by and large, young Black men, went on to have jobs and careers and be productive. And so it wasn't just the reduction in the shootings, but it was changing their lifestyle and changing the culture by putting them in a pathway away from that kind of lifestyle. When you see all of those things happening, that's what success looks like.
Right. And thank you all for those responses. I think there's some things that's easily measured, like you said, the recidivism rate and other things. I wonder, Mr. Chair, as part of the follow-up, if we could, and the director said she's only 6.5 weeks in. I'm not expecting her to solve all the world's problems because they've been going on for decades. But if one of the things we could get as a delegation, those things that are measurable, so we could identify like what that success actually looked like, and also, help share that information with our colleagues as we seek funding for the city. You're on mute, sir.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Senator Hayes. I saw Senator Walsh. I saw your hand go up and then it went down. Did you have a question before we move to Senator Ferguson?
No, but I would just add that as a part of that is the fiscal investment, because I do know, and I'd like to hear about what do we really think it should cost, because I know in early days, Commissioner Harris and I talked about the difference between, what's $3 million put in a Safe Streets program in Baltimore region versus $11 million or twice or 3 times that amount in other jurisdictions where it's been successful. So just making sure that we are putting the inputs that we need to get the results that we're looking for. So I'd be interested in not only looking at what we're doing in-house, but how it compares to what we need to invest in and whether the state needs to step up some more to support it. Thank you, Chairman. Give me an opportunity to say that.
Thank you, Senator.
Do you mind if I just share some information?
Please.
So just to provide some additional context on the heels of Senator Washington's point there, Reagan Cunningham over in Oakland, California, went through the same experience that we're going through now, where they saw focused deterrence fail twice for them. And the third time was the charm for them too. They failed twice for the exact same reasons that we failed, and instituted this cycle of call-ins, shooting reviews, making sure that community-based organizations were involved, and over a 5-year period saw a 50% reduction in their shootings and homicides. And so we know that this model works. Reagan Cunningham is someone who I have intentionally connected to while I've been in this office to make sure that we're leveraging the learning there. With regard to investment, we've got local philanthropy here in Baltimore City committing $1.2 million over 3 years right now to pilot this work. We have indicated to them that we needed $1.8 million to pilot the work, and the pilot is not expanding it across the city. So to the senator's earlier point, that would need to exponentially increase when we're able to prove our proof of concept in the Western District when we're ready to go. And with regard to Senator Hayes's comments about the measurable criteria, the plan has been delivered to Mayor Scott. He has approved my plan with the measurements and the metrics. The police commissioner's also seen that plan. And as soon as he gives me the go to release it to you all, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I was just sort of looking. So during the time period where that program particularly, or it was reported as failing, that, I mean, from 2008 to 2014, the city's homicide per 100,000 residents rate was between 36, 37, 38. Since 2015, that has been 55 homicides per 100,000. That is a massive increase. And so it's like, I don't know if that was, but if we got back to 30, if we got back to 40 per, it would be a massive reduction in homicides and loss of life. I'm just, what is the core difference? It's not, how do you assess the core difference between 2008 to 2014 to then 2015 through 2019? I mean, there's like a 30% increase in our homicide per 100,000. And I know homicide's not everything, shootings matter, and it's not just, but it is a lead, there's a leading inconsistency between 33 per 100,000 and 55 per 100,000.
That is, first of all, that you bring up a good point, but that is a question that has multiple answers to it. There's no one answer. I'll give you just two examples. One example is when you hit 2015, you had a national issue of national proportion right here in Baltimore that changed the dynamic of policing. And so then you have a national issue that if you plug in prosecutions, because the police were under such scrutiny, and what we all remember what happened in 2015, you tie that to a diminished prosecution of those cases because there was a diminished performance by the police department in a number of ways. And then you look at over time, then secondly, here's the key component that most people don't know. In a murder case, a shooting case, they're the same. The difference is one person died, one person survived. So medical attention is a factor in a homicide rate that has nothing to do with policing. Perhaps if a person got medical attention and did not die, then that attributes to the shooting rate, but it doesn't negatively affect the murder rate when it's a better application of a medical response. Now that has nothing to do with policing, but there are a number of issues beginning then with policing, with prosecutions, with community support, community help for those kinds of cases, the flow of information. It's so many different dynamics that led to an increase that now 4, 5 years, 6 years later, we're now developing more community trust than we've had in a 5-year period. We're getting it back, but it is an extremely slow process. But I would say that answer is complex, it's multidisciplinary, and it has to do with all the things you've heard Director Jackson and I talking about, on top of a number of social things that we're trying to do now. And the group dynamic is very, very different. Now we're seeing people getting killed and shooting and killing other people in their 50s and 60s, both victims and perpetrators. That's not a typical gang dynamic when you look at the age, the average age of group and gang members across the country. People in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s still perpetrating the crime of shooting and killing. And so that's a different dynamic outside of group dynamics that we're trying to work on that speaks to a culture. And that culture has grown over the years because of a number of reasons.
Thank you. Last question, Senator Sidnor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Commissioner Harrison. Question, could you tell me what is the city's clearance rate currently on homicides solved?
I think right now, I reported earlier that we were at 48%, and that's right now. We've had a number of clearances this year. a few fewer murders at this time than we had at the same time last year. I think we're down 6. Now, that's not a big difference. We need to be much more than that. But I think as of today, it was at 48%.
And on average, across police departments similarly situated to Baltimore, what are their average homicide rates? I mean, clearance rates, and how far off are we from?
I'm so glad you
like us to
pointed
be?
that. I'm so glad you framed that the way you did, because there are 18,000 police departments in America, and people will compare a department with 2,500 sworn members to a department with 50 sworn members and say, you know, that we should have the same clearance rate. And that's, you know, in rural America is very different than in urban America. A city that has one murder and they cleared it is 100%. And it's very different. We are about the same across big cities our size, somewhere in the mid 40s or low 50s. And most cities in the earlier part of the year have higher clearance rates than at the end of the year when the numbers are much higher. But I think if you look at Baltimore and compare other departments with 2,000 officers or more, you'll see it's probably somewhere in the mid 40s or low 50s. And the larger cities struggle more so than our smaller rural cities and towns.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Our chair stepped away, so you know he left it open season for us to take over. Now he's back real quick. I apologize for coming late for those who presented earlier, but good to see Sheriff Anderson, Colonel Jones, and also I don't know what your title is these days, Sheriff, Deputy Sheriff Harper, or whatever. But great to see you all, and thank you all for taking time out of your all schedule to join us. The chair really did leave. Is he coming back? I saw him peek in. Anyone else have any questions? Oh yeah, thank you, Chief Ford too, for joining us. Senator Washington, did you have any additional questions?
No, Chair Emeritus.
No, I got caught up. I just want to say I think that all of our questions did get answered.
Yes, good.
Thank you, Senator Hayes, for stepping in. I'm going to start closing at this moment and say thank you to each and every one of our panelists for joining us tonight and for their commitment to increasing public safety in the city of Baltimore. In order to reduce crime and prevent violence in our city, it will take a collaborative approach. I think that we heard that from Director Jackson. We look forward to doing everything that we possibly can to bring resources back to Baltimore that addresses the needs of our constituents and most importantly, our neighborhoods. If the hour wasn't long enough for you, the public, please feel free to continue the conversation by connecting with us via social media. The Baltimore City Senate delegation is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You may also visit bcsdelegation.com, our website. We will be holding grassroots briefings every Monday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. during the legislative session. We hope that you'll join us for next week's for a conversation on education, including the reopening of schools. Again, thank you. Have a blessed evening, and thank you again to all of our panelists.